Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Smart Indian Agriculture on TheFederal.com. I am Vivian Fernandez. About 2 billion people are estimated to suffer from hidden hunger or malnutrition, and a substantial number are in India. There are two strategies to tackle this issue. One is by fortifying food with micronutrients like iron, zinc, and vitamin A, and we do that with milk, cooking oil, and rice. The other is to breed crops that have a higher micronutrient content. The latter are called biofortified crops, and CGIAR, which is a group of international agricultural research organizations, has a dedicated program called HarvestPlus to promote the cultivation and consumption of biofortified food grains. The aim is to reach 1 billion people by 2030 and meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal of ending all forms of malnutrition by then. To discuss this, we have with us Dr. Ravindra Grover, Asia Regional Coordinator of HarvestPlus. Dr. Grover, thank you very much for making the time and welcome to this program.
Thank you, Vivian, for having me here.
Dr. Grover, between industrially fortified food and biofortified food grains, you obviously prefer the latter. Why?
Thank you very much for this interview and this question. I think it's an important question. As you said the context very rightly, the number is now 3 billion people who are suffering from something called hidden hunger. And it's there in almost every part of the world. 1 in 2 children, 2 in 3 women are suffering from hidden hunger. And many a times we are not even aware. And by the time we get to know about it, it's already too late. So, we need to definitely do something about it. And it's not only a health problem, it's also an economical problem. Nearly 11% of the GDP in most of the global south countries is going towards the losses that happen because of malnutrition. So, there's a sense of urgency that's there to, address this problem. As you said, rightly said, there are many approaches to tackle malnutrition. One of the approaches, which is the most common, is diversification, where we encourage people to diversify their diets, add fruits and vegetables there. The challenge there is many a times people in developing countries can't afford diversification. So it's not something that they can do. And they are primarily still dependent. 70 to 80% of their calorie intake is coming from key staples like wheat, rice, maize, etc. So, that brings us to 2 more approaches. One is food fortification. Food fortification is, as you rightly mentioned, it's an industrial fortification, which happens at the time of processing of food, where additives like minerals and vitamins are added into our food. The most common example is the iodized salt that we see. Plus now we are hearing about even fortified rice in countries like India, and there are other foods which are being promoted. Again, the another addition to this is food is the supplementation, which we all know. We have seen it during COVID, where we were being prescribed vitamin and zinc pills. That's again has a limited reach, and also is not a preferred mode of consumption by the population in the countries. Now, this is another interesting approach, which is more cost effective and less disruptive, which is biofortification. The approach is very simple, and this whole journey started 20 years back when our founder, Dr. Howard Buis, asked this simple question: can we do something to the plants so that they can work for human health? And with this idea, the whole story started. Dr. Howard Buis went on to win World Food Prize for his idea. In last 20 years, then we have developed nearly 400 varieties of staples which are rich in zinc, iron, or vitamin A. Which means if these crops are consumed by the population, that can take care of nearly 40% to 100% of their daily dietary needs of micronutrients. And in case of open pollinated varieties, these varieties once developed can be then consumed year on year by the farmers. So to answer your question, why we chose this approach, because this is cost effective. It works well for particularly the vulnerable groups who are not reached by other strategies like food fortification, supplementations, and also for the rural population, which is eating what they are growing at their own farm.
Mm-hmm. So why is it economical? And is it better? I mean, would you still recommend industrially fortified food for those who can afford it?
Yes, Vivian, I think, there's no silver bullet as far as when it comes to malnutrition. In my view, these approaches are complementary in nature. Say, wherever possible, having said that, wherever possible, the first approach is to harness as much as we can from nature, right? And this, the biofortification sometimes looks very sciencey concept. It confuses people. But the choice is very simple. If you can get a feature phone and a smartphone at the same price, right? So why would you not choose a smartphone? It's a simpler choice to make. So there are varieties which do not cost you differently. We have higher zinc, iron, and vitamin A, and those do not create any change in the look, feel, and the taste of those varieties. Are equally liked by the consumers. I mean, so why not then shift to the biofortified crops?
Yeah.
So
you said they're economical. How about the economical?
So, they are economical because biofortified varieties, unlike food fortification and supplementation, we don't need to be doing these investments every time we want to produce this food. The varieties, once developed, can be then retained with very minimal, efforts and cost. Second thing is the food does not move away from the consumption centers. Take an example of a farmer who's growing wheat and consuming 60% of it is at his farm itself. So the food is produced at the farm, eaten there, unlike, food fortification or other approaches where the food has to move all the way to the factory, get fortified, come back. In terms of logistics, a lot of gets sorted. And even the climate aspect of it, all this requires, there is a climate cost to pay for all this logistics that's involved.
So you are not saying that, people, if they want to get out of malnutrition, they should change their dietary habits. For example, if I'm a malnourished person, you're not suggesting that, and I'm a rice eater, you're not suggesting that I eat millets instead.
Oh, absolutely. Don't mistake me. Like I said, there's no silver bullet, and diversification, like I mentioned very early on is a best strategy to have, as much as we can have it. And Vivian, we also have a portfolio of products which is based on millets. We have calcium rich millets. We have iron pearl millets. In fact, a lot of our programming is built around, these millets crops. In fact, our recent school feeding programs where we are trying to tackle malnutrition in the school children by aligning with government's midday meal program and the supplementary nutrition program. The focus is to introduce iron-rich pearl millet in the portfolio itself. So yes, wherever possible, diversification is the first line that we should be taking, but like I said, we are in a transition phase and staples are still a key part of our diet. So, all we are saying is why not use better staples, if they are available.
But food, of course, is tradition, food is culture. So changing dietary habits is not very easy.
So, that's the point I mentioned. We are nowhere we are telling you are eating wheat. We are saying keep eating wheat, just replace the variety with the, thing. And it doesn't change anything to the taste. In fact, we launched India's first naturally nutritious zinc-rich flour. One of our partners launched in Ludhiana. And it's getting a tremendous response because they have used all of the best approaches. It's built on cold grinding. It's a whole wheat flour, and it's getting a very good response from the consumers. So, we are not actually telling people to change their dietary habits because this is the least disruptive approach. It allows you to eat what you were eating earlier.
You said that HarvestPlus has a portfolio of 400 varieties of various crops. Now, with advances in breeding, particularly gene editing, do you think that breeding crops for better nutrition has become easier?
Yeah, so, again, so the choice of technology is dependent on the prevailing country laws as well. As far as HarvestPlus is concerned, the varieties that we develop are built on through conventional breeding. There are benefits those can be offered through gene editing, the genetic modification. but the crops that HarvestPlus have built till date are built through conventional breeding, and that makes us also easy for us to operate in countries because it does not require the food startups to adhere to any additional food guidelines, and they can walk easily through the food system. Say our experience has been there's a lot of potential still there in the conventional breeding, which we are leveraging at this moment. I don't know the future, as countries become more open probably to gene editing and other approaches also and all that. Maybe these approaches will also work. Technically, biofortification can be achieved through agronomic biofortification or through conventional breeding or biotechnology. Yes, technically, all these possibilities are there on the table.
How do you determine what should be the micronutrient content of biofortified crops and what proportion of the daily requirement they can meet, accounting for losses while cooking and processing and so on? How do you determine that a biofortified crop can give you at least half of the recommended daily allowance of that particular micronutrient?
It's a great question, Vivian. We use something called as a biofortification priority index, which uses all the factors that you just outlined in terms of the dietary consumption patterns of vulnerable people, their requirements in terms of the preferred cooking methods, variability available in this to arrive at country crop combinations. For example, we would have preferred, let's say, zinc wheat in Pakistan or zinc rice in Bangladesh, depending on what we see that can be the most optimum mix for that particular country and crop. So we have a framework which is used, which is a globally accepted framework called Biofortification Priority Index, which helps you make these decisions in terms of arriving at country crop combinations and in terms of deciding what is then the delta that we are trying to achieve over the regular varieties.
Mm-hmm. See, India has a network of research institutions at the central level. We have state agriculture universities as well. And these have developed about 114 biofortified varieties through what is known as the Common Resource Platform of ICAR. We started about 5 years ago. Now, is HarvestPlus just an additionality? Where do you fit in?
Yeah, that's a good question. Vivian, like I mentioned, we are a catalytic organization. I think around 100 odd people sitting across the globe and trying to make this difference. And, and before I answer this question, I'd also like to highlight that we are celebrating our 20th year anniversary this year. And this is important for us that we have reached around 100 million people worldwide with biofortified crops. And how this has been possible for a small organization like this because of the model we operate in. We operate through partnerships, and NARS, that the National Agriculture Research System, is a very, very key partner in all the countries that we operate. So even in India, like you rightly mentioned, we work with ICAR and state agriculture universities, along with the CG institutes, bring these varieties, to help them release these varieties, also help them in multiplication of the seed and taking it to the consumer. So it's very, very well coordinated with ICAR. ICAR has, India is one of the countries where we luckily have a very strong NARS system, and which is leading the effort, in field of biofortification. As you rightly mentioned, there are 100 plus varieties now which are developed by ICAR, and we work extremely closely with them. So there's a perfect synergy that exists between HarvestPlus and ICAR. I'll say the leadership in case of biofortification in India is with ICAR, and you can look at us as a support or a catalytic organization which is helping them bridge the supply chain gaps wherever those are.
Mm-hmm. In 20 years of HarvestPlus, you reached about 100 million people, and over the next 7 years we intend to reach 1 billion. Now that's quite a stretch target. How do you propose to achieve that?
Yeah, great question, Vivian. They say the first one is always difficult. So I think it took us quite a lot of a time to achieve our first 100 million. But I'll also like to clarify that, our reach when we talk about 100 million people, this is only the on-farm consumption. We have never taken into consideration the off-farm consumption because, when we started our journey, the on-farm consumption was very, very important for us. Our primary target was the farmers, and we wanted to ensure that the farmers there and families are consuming these crops. But off lately, as the surplus is increasing in the market, more and more people in peri-urban and urban areas, the low-income urban populations are consuming these crops. So, the reach is already expanding. And as far as scaling is concerned, we believe that the governments and the private sector will have a key role to play in the scaling of these crops. And we are seeing that there's a tremendous support that we are getting from the governments all across the world. Nearly 24 policy documents now have listed biofortification as a priority strategy. Even in India, you see our Prime Minister dedicated 17 varieties at the last FAO annual event. ICR has taken the leadership position there. We are getting a tremendous response now from private sector, and this has significantly increased post-COVID when consumers have started demanding for naturally nutritious crop. Everyone understood how much zinc is important, and then they want to take foods which are naturally rich in zinc. So the private and the public sector is going to be the next, is going to bring the next pillar of growth, and I'm sure it's going to happen much faster. I think we got a good start, and like you said, I think achieving 1 million mark in 6 to 7 years, we are very positive that should be totally possible for us to get.
Mm-hmm. You speak a lot about the private sector, but in India, rice and wheat are primarily procured by the government. I mean, the private sector has a small role. In the case of rice, I would say it has got a marginal role. And when the government procures, it procures on the basis of fair average quality. It does not care about whether it has so much of zinc or so much of iron or so much of some other micronutrient. So why should farmers grow something for which they do not get paid?
That's a great question, Vivian, and that's a question that we should also pose to our policymakers. That is there something that can be done on this front?
No, tell me what is there something that can be done? For example, in the case of mustard is procured on the basis of oil content. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, in the case of wheat and rice, can we devise a system where we pay for the attributes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, it's doable in two ways. I think that we need to break this problem into two parts. One is, the building incentives. Second is also segregating this from the regular varieties, right? I think that's the first part. If we want to build in incentives, we need to segregate these varieties. And Vivian, you'll appreciate the challenge in case of wheat and rice is that the biofortified wheat and rice look exactly the same as the regular rice. Right. So that adds a little bit more to the problem. So which means we require, if we want to achieve the differential pricing or the incentive for this, we need to ensure that there's an adequate testing infrastructure available. So, HarvestPlus has a laboratory at ICRISAT campus which tests for zinc and iron. But then as the volumes grow, we need more such laboratories available at, near to the farms which can do this testing in real time. Second part is, like you said, if there are incentives that can be provided to the farmers, that will definitely give a boost to the whole biofortification journey because, the most of the procurement is done by the government. But I think very importantly, it's also important that if FCI, the Food Corporation of India, which is a very important agency here, I can give you an example. We have been working, like I mentioned, on the school feeding and the Anganwadi system, and the schools want these crops to be there in the system, but then it is not possible unless Food Corporation of India, because most of the wheat under midday meal is provided by the Food Corporation of India, unless they pack it in a bag which is tagged for biofortified crops separately and then supplied to these schools. So there is a little bit of a process change that is needed at the Food Corporation of India level to ensure that these crops are procured and then supplied on priority to, for example, a good starting point could be 120 million people which are being fed under the children which are being fed under the midday meal program itself. That could be a kind of a good starting point for us. but that will require, like I said, some changes in the process, better testing infrastructure, and some amount of incentives that needs to be built at the farmer procurement level for these varieties.
You spoke about partners, and the private sector definitely can do a very good job of marketing. For example, ITC has popularized Sharbati Atta. I never knew what Sharbati Atta was, but now everyone who doesn't even know that where it is grown, or they all want Sharbati Atta. Have these fast-moving consumer good companies, giants like ITC or Hindustan Lever, have they shown interest in biofortified crops? Or who are your partners? Who are your preferred partners?
Vivian, like I mentioned, we are working with both the large companies as well as small and medium enterprises. We have got interest from the large food and FMCG companies. Well, the challenge there is sometimes the decision making takes a little bit of more time compared to the startups and the SMEs, which are like fast ones to take anything which is innovative. But the common piece here is there's a lot of interest because organizations, irrespective of their size, are looking at it as a great portfolio differentiator. Eventually, because consumers, they say, oh, this is natural, this is a natural source of zinc, I want to consume it more, compared to the other alternatives, which are not completely natural. So in the first phase of our commercial scaling, we have been focusing mainly with the startup partners. We have been working with partners like Agrozy, which is a millet-based startup in Maharashtra, having a complete range of biofortified millets. Organizations like Aarti Mill, which was the first one to launch naturally nutritious zinc-based whole wheat flour. Organizations like Green Day in Lucknow, again working on biofortified atta. These are some of the organizations who have taken lead, the startups, the social enterprises who have taken lead, and we fully support their initiatives in terms of wherever they can, wherever they're facing challenges, and ensuring that they're successful. And we are hopeful, as you would have seen the trend, once the startups are always the first ones to start the journey, and then the biggies join. And I guess we are almost at a stage where we will see some big names jumping into the biofortification bandwagon because it's making so much sense to the consumers.
Mm-hmm. When these biggies jump into the bandwagon, normally they go in for premium pricing. So will that make these biofortified crops unaffordable to the people who really require them?
Vivian, I think if you look at it, the differential pricing has always been there, right? Say if you look at the way we consume our rice, we have a restaurant in Hyderabad called Paradise. It's a very famous restaurant. There are 4 floors of it, and every floor offers you the same biryani at a different price. And you can get the biryani in Hyderabad on the roadside at a very affordable price as well. So I think this differential pricing is order of the day when it's food. And I think if there's a great mechanism, it's also a good mechanism because if there is a willingness to pay, a higher willingness to pay at a one particular strata of consumers, and that can be used to subsidize it for a strata of population which cannot afford paying more, I think it's a brilliant strategy to have. So I won't be really complaining if the biggies can build the premium, because they will be able to build the premium only for the population which is ready to pay, right? As long as for the masses it remains affordable, that's perfectly fine.
I've got one more question. See, generally, most of the agricultural research has gone into rice and wheat and maize. I mean, these get priority, but there are a whole lot of crops which are known as orphan crops, which the poor people consume. Like, for example, in Africa, it could be cassava or yam or banana. Okay. Do you have any program to address these so-called orphan crops?
Well, yes, say we have been looking at opportunities in case of orphan crops as well for biofortification wherever possible, and this makes sense from a vulnerable point of view. For example, if you take the example of island countries, they have been consuming a lot of crops where there's a good scope of enriching the nutrition levels there as well and all that. So yes, so we started with the key staples because keeping in mind the amount of funding that's available, as and when the governments are making more resources available, this strategy can be kind of taken to wider set of crops, including the ones which are locally grown and locally consumed, particularly the ones that you mentioned, like the orphan crops, of course, as well.
All right, Dr. Grover, thank you very much for those insights.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.